Are you going to be?
You always have class.
Thank you, sir. But I do have some good news for you.
What's that?
The temple got
Okay, why am I not hearing things? I'm having stop video. No. I can't hear him. Well, I can't hear you, Rabbi. Switch
Hold on.
There
Hello,
we go.
I'm here.
Yeah. You're on mute, Rabbi.
You see my new background?
I do. It's bad. It's up. It's like a mirror image.
Wait, is it backwards?
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird because I thought it was showing up backwards, and so that's weird. Okay, so I thought it was it was showing up it was showing up the other way. So wait a second. So I'm gonna so wait, so that means I gotta do it this way.
There you go.
Yeah.
Move your head. What does it say?
What about now?
That's fine. Except for I can't see it because your head's in the way. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Cute.
So it's the right way now?
Yeah.
It does?
It looks fine. So when you look at it, it's backwards?
Yeah. When I looked at it, it looks backwards, but that's
funny.
You see our ad, Harvey, for Beth and Me Bingo. Do you see it? Harvey.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good. Do you see our backdrop?
I see that right now.
Hey, Sharon. Look at that. See? It's our little advertising for Temple Beth and Me Bingo.
I love it.
Cute.
It's a little ad for our Beth and Me Bingo.
You're turning into an IT expert, Rabbi.
Well, clearly I'm not an idea because I had it backwards, but it's just weird that it looked frontwards, but then when I put it on, I looked like that, and I was like, that's backwards. Hey, your head just popped in there.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Tracy. But now look, she's gone. The ghost. The ghost. We're gonna go on a Facebook. Sharon is cooking, huh?
Right.
Cooking.
LOV. I forgot what
ELV.
Yeah.
She was at a cooking school up in Oregon with her sister.
Oh, nice. She was doing a Zoom cooking class?
No,
this was years ago.
A couple of years ago.
Oh, I thought you meant just now.
Oh.
No, I'm working too many hours for that right now.
Oh.
And good to see you.
Take care. And cooking class. We're doing a cooking class in 3 weeks. 2 weeks. 2.5 weeks. Shavuot cooking class. May 26th. 25th?
May 26th. What day of the week is it?
May 26th.
May 26th, yeah.
What day?
It can't be May. Is it Tuesday night?
It's Tuesday night.
Tuesday night. There you go. Oh, look, I can see myself now with the thing the right way because I'm on I'm looking at how we look on Facebook. So yeah, Beth and Me Bingo. I'm going to take that down because it's really aggravating. But wait, I'm going to wait until more people are. On.
Okay.
Let's get more people. Let's get some more people on here. We're streaming. But yeah, where is everybody? I know we started. I was on right on time this time. But
you're actually early, Rabbi.
I was early. Yeah, I know. I don't.
You're not early for anything.
I know. Well, I'm always here. I'm just not always there. I don't even know how that's a very mystical thing I just said, but where is everybody? Oh, here they go. Here's Marina. I know our class, our adult B'nai Mitzvah people will be joining. And the thing was, is I had very ambitious goals of how much we were going to read today, but very ambitious goals.
You're going to try to get,
there's three
finish
people.
Leviticus?
Yeah. I was. I wanted to try to catch up.
Yeah.
We have three people watching on Facebook, which is phenomenal. It's also good that people are up on the Facebook time.
Now, as the moderator, Rabbi, can you see who's on Facebook?
No, that's the thing. I can't unless they're in a viewing party.
Right.
I can't see who's there, but it does. You know, if they say hello, Diane Gilden is on Facebook right now.
Hmm.
Hey, if you're on Facebook, let us know who's there. Hey, I can do that. I can communicate. That way. Nancy
Rabbi
Lefko.
Mark, the great communicator.
Nancy Lefko, right? Send me a smoke signal. If you are on, please send a smoke signal. Send by Morse code. Nancy Lefko is on. Diane is on. So that's now we're up to 5, by the way. It's a veritable flood of people are rushing to come on to Facebook right now to be part of this. No, it's good. I mean, it's great that we already have 5 on Facebook. It would be great to get everybody on Zoom who's supposed to be on too. I'm saying supposed to be on because, you know, we've got our regulars who are part of the adult B'nai Mitzvah class that are supposed to be learning a little bit each week. And some of them actually are already starting to work on their Divrei Torah. I've got my first few speeches during this time too. So, and it's not that far away. I mean, we have less than a month. We're 3 weeks away from the adult B'nai Mitzvah class. So I kind of wanted, especially for the people who are in the class, to get us up to the Torah portion so they could see it. And right now it's only Marina, at least on from Zoom, that I can see. But we are going to go back and look at, we're going to look at the we'll start from where we left off, because we did have a wonderful, we had a bunch of stuff that we didn't get to last week from Kedoshim. So technically speaking, we have a lot of road to cover. And
I thought we finished Kedoshim.
We almost did. We didn't quite finish it. As a matter of fact, I know we didn't, because we didn't get to the one of the other really problematic lines in here, which I said we would get to. You know what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to. This is my really bad. These are my these are glasses, actually, that my wife won't let me wear out of the house.
Hey, Mark.
No, you can't put them on. Oh my God.
She won't even let me wear them on Zoom. They're what's it called? Progressives, but she thinks they're horrible.
They are.
I don't know. What do you think?
I agree with your wife.
Thank you, Mike.
I thought they were kind of sporty. I think they were kind of sporty.
Oh no.
I thought they were kind of sporty.
Adorable.
Plus, they also have they go into no, I haven't. I have. They go in their they change colors too. There's Bob.
We'll start calling you Clark. You look like Clark Kent.
These are my. Yeah, you're right. But speaking of those glasses, those are the ones that what's his name used to Rambis, Kurt Rambis on the lake.
Yeah,
big old glasses. So,
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Bob. It's good to see you guys again.
I'm calling you from
the guys. I mean, it's him.
I'm calling you from Dodger Stadium here.
Yeah.
Who's winning, Bob?
Well, right now we're not playing, but
oh, okay.
Bob is winning.
I will tell you, we will wait a couple seconds before everybody. I'll take these off. As we're waiting for people, maybe I'll put these back on. These normal ones. We do have it's it's not a Temple Beth Ami production, but tomorrow night there's going to be a great new show that we're broadcasting on JLTV that I worked with the Israel government tourist office on. I mentioned it last week on our Yom Ha'atzmaut, or 2 weeks ago. We're going to show the first episode tomorrow night. It's a 30-minute news magazine that comes out of Israel, but it's produced and hosted by the people in the LA office. And there's some really great things for that'll be on the first episode, make you feel good about Israel. And there's a wonderful little promo piece that the Israel government, the IDF put together, Israel Defense Forces, and it's really, really good. It's about a 5-minute little promo in there, and it's so well done.
What time
And
is
tomorrow
that,
is the secular anniversary of Israel. It's not Israel's Independence Day, because Israel celebrates its Independence Day on the Hebrew date. But the rest of the world celebrates it on that day, May 14th, in the sense that if you look in a calendar or look in a book, history book, it's going to say Israel Independence Day is May 14th. The interesting thing is, for the Palestinians, May 14th every year is called the Nakba, the day of catastrophe. And so they see that as a horrible day. And interestingly, only about once every 19 years or so, it's on the exact same day. So usually it's not on the same day, which means that Israelis and Palestinians don't have to have the date on the same date. But it is interesting that the secular date is tomorrow, which is why we just got finished Monday, but you'll be able to see it tomorrow. So that is, I'll post a little link and a reminder tomorrow when it's on. It'll be on at 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock our time on JLTV. I'll post a link to it. So it's a half hour, and we will get going because we do have a lot of ground I said we're going to cover today. And I do want to give everybody a chance, especially those who have not been here for the last few weeks. People like Bob. No, it's okay. I'm not picking on you. But we are going to get into Leviticus in the last part of Leviticus, the parts that we're going to kind of finish with. So we have we have Jane Moss is on Facebook with us from Orange County. We have Kim Zimmerman with us probably from Santa Clarita. Lori Gardens with us from Santa Clarita. So we've got a few people locally and a few other people that are joining us from far away on Facebook. So I did say I would do that. Okay. Well, now we can begin because Philip has joined us. No, you have not missed anything yet, folks, because we're about to start, and we're going to start in the portion. Hold it one second. I am going to take down now my commercial for Temple Beth Ami bingo. Enough with this. Going back to this, or I can do that, but no, I'll go back to this. Go back to where I really am. So we're going to take a look at Kedoshim first. We're going to go through more, and then we're going to stop into this week's portions, double portions again, Bahar B'chukotai. So I have a plan. We'll see whether we can get to it. So let's get to it. So let's take a look at the Torah portion, which is we're going to start in where we kind of left off was in Kedoshim, where we get the parts that we left were part of the holiness code about. I'll just show you where we were. Not to eat. Well, we read about not eating things with blood in them, flesh with blood in them. We also read about not taking stuff from plants, from trees before they've grown for 4 years. And then we also read some really famous lines like, reprove your kinsmen, incur no guilt for them. Don't take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself, I am the Lord, which we, again, call it the golden rule, at least the way the golden rule is given in Judaism. But in literally the next chapter, which we didn't read, chapter 20, we get another revisit. We revisit the laws of sexual relations. And you can see that it's definitely in the context of not behaving like the Canaanites. So it says, say further to the Israelite people, among the Israelites or among strangers residing in Israel, who gives any of their offsprings to Molech, shall be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones, which is a specific punishment of being stoned to death. And again, giving an offspring to Molech is probably child sacrifice to Molech, the pagan god of one of the pagan gods in the Canaanite pantheon. Molech literally means king, and it's the king, the god that is the king. And so this is specifically laid out there. And it goes on to say, if anyone is connecting with ghosts or familiar spirits and goes after them, I'll also set my face against that person, cut him off from amongst the people. That's not a death penalty, but it's pretty serious. You're not supposed to talk to ghosts. Doesn't mean you can't talk to ghosts. It doesn't mean there are no ghosts. Actually, to the contrary, it may imply that there are ghosts, but it is telling you you're not supposed to talk to them. That's there. Here's one of the famous lines of previously we read about revering your parents, specifically revering your mother and father, Yirah. Here it says, if anyone insults his father or his mother, he shall be put to death. He has insulted his father and mother, and his blood guilt is upon him. Which again, it's not just honor and revering, but there's a punishment if you do the opposite. Now, let's get into this part, the good part. Well, it's not really the good part. It's more bad parts, but let's get into the sexy part. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. It's clearly a death penalty. And then it goes on with, if a man lies with his father's wife, it is the nakedness of his father. Again, these are same things that we read in chapter 18. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law. So these aren't just blood relatives. They're relatives, by marriage, could be. Now here we get to the second version, or the second way that we have this commandment against homosexuality. So this is the part I really wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about. And here it is. If a man lies with a male as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing. They shall be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. So there you have the second version, if you will, of that pronouncement against homosexuality. So again, we read another version of this already. You've already read it. It was again in chapter 18, just before. Actually, give me 2 seconds, because I will scroll it very quick to where it was before so you can see it. Here it is. Here it says, do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. So you see what the difference is here. Not only is it, again, something that we're commanded not to do, but says again, toeva, an abomination. And here it says, mot umatu, that they shall surely be put to death. And again, damehem ban, the blood guilt is upon them. They've done something, again, we have that phrase over and over again. We have it down here too. If a man approaches any beast to mate with it, you shall kill the woman, sorry. It already has the man. So either man or woman that engage in bestiality. Not every one of these sins, by the way, is punishable by death. If a man lies with a woman in her infirmity, which is a very archaic way of saying if she's menstruating, both of them shall be cut off from among the people, but it doesn't say they're to be killed. There are other ones that do talk about. There are ones that also talk about death, as we saw, specifically adultery. So the interesting thing here, of course, is that adultery is punished with the same punishment level that homosexuality is. So we can make the argument for people that are invoking the Bible for punishments for homosexuality, we would really have to say that adultery would have to come, you'd have to be willing to enforce the same punishments for adultery. And you'd have to enforce punishments for having sex with a woman during her menstruation. Even though it wouldn't be death, it still would require punishment, that there's a consequence to it. Clearly,
can still have multiple wives and concubines, and so
well because it actually, Phyllis, it said specifically there what it was. It said specifically if a man commits adultery with a married woman. So the issue isn't, again, it isn't if a man has had sex with another woman. It's if
a married
sex with another man's wife. And again, I don't want to say a married woman, a woman who's, again, married to somebody else.
I have a question, Mark.
Yeah.
Cut off from your people. Is that a real punishment like banishment, or is that a punishment that will be imposed by God?
Well, you're asking the question of, what was it ever a punishment imposed? I think it was. By the time the rabbis are gonna be talking about this, they'll start to say that this is something that this is the punishment in Hebrew is specifically that Ronnie's talking about is right here, v'nichretu, and they are karet, they are cut off. So again, later on, the rabbis will interpret this to be a spiritual punishment, but I mean, I think it was banishment if people somehow knowingly did this. So you're going to ask the question, how would anybody knowingly do this? The answer is this: all of these things that are prohibited were all practices done by the Canaanites, all of them. So bestiality, offering up your child to Molech. I mean, the key is the context. The key to this discussion is the fact that the context of this clearly is about engaging in the practices. The chapter begins with it and it ends with it. And so it says right here, you shall not follow the practices of the nation that I'm driving out before you, for it is because they did all these things that I abhorred them. And again, it's God saying, I don't want you to be like the Canaanites. So again, what are all these things? What links all of these things? Canaanites did them, but more importantly, Canaanites did other stuff. The Canaanites, they drank, they ate, they had children that they didn't offer to Molech. They had lots of things that were not bad. So what is so bad about these things? Why are they put into this? Because they're non-procreative sex acts. All of those things hurt the community by not letting them procreate. And if you want to understand how today's homosexuals, including homosexual rabbis, come to terms with this, is because they understand that this is really about a tribal society and a society that's moving away even from tribal affiliations into more urban lifestyles, how they're making this transition and how they're dealing with societies and civilizations that behave differently from them and that they've judged to be non-functioning and in some cases completely evil societies. And so when people are lumping together these things, including homosexual acts, this is the issue. Now, are there people who still say that homosexuality is an issue for us today because we become too much like our Gentile neighbors? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I do want to say, when it comes to this issue and what the Torah says, I have a real problem with Christians invoking this law. Because literally, unless they're willing to punish and to marginalize everybody who's committed adultery in their community, including their church leaders, including people that they continue to allow to be their politicians who they support, you can't invoke the Bible against homosexuality. And I've said that in public settings, and I'll continue to say it. that you don't have the right to pick and choose which Torah passages that you want to deal with.
Well,
And so
so
that's
much
one
for
of my biggest issues in our society today.
so much for no fault divorce,
What?
Rabbi. So much for no fault divorce.
No,
Right?
well, yeah, well, that's not an issue. And Philip is, by the way, a practicing family law attorney, so he,
Yeah.
he can say that.
But if,
Yeah,
I thought that the Christians believe that they no longer have to follow the law as long as they accept Jesus Christ as their
fine,
savior to their heart.
but you know as well as I do, and I've been in these discussions. I've been in debates. I did a debate when Prop 8 was on the ballot 10 years ago. We got in these 12 years ago now. We got in these debates, and I debated a professor from Biola University. I said, "You're invoking parts of the Bible that you don't follow, and so you've picked one line out of the entire section." I also then further blew him away with the midrash that Adam was originally created as a hermaphrodite, which is a traditional accepted midrash. So, look, I can only tell you that when people look at the Bible and try to figure out, and again, it's not my issue, because if I was, and I have colleagues, I have friends who are rabbis who are gay who have to deal with this text, and they have to understand the Bible is criminalizing and dealing with it with their life. And again, I don't even want to say lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle. I mean, that's their life. That's the people they love. So, do we come to terms with it today? I think yes, because the Jewish community is overwhelmingly, including many voices in the Orthodox community today, continue to say we cannot marginalize people because of their gender identity, because of their sexual preference. So I will tell you, the Jewish community, whose Torah this is, have had very little problem dealing with it. I will share one thing. Many, many years ago, about 25 years ago, and I think probably one of my first friends in rabbinical school who was gay rabbi, and actually was the rabbi for a very short period of time, was the rabbi actually here at Beth Shalom. While I was still in rabbinical school, he moved out here to LA and was working out at Beth Shalom. I talked to him about this. I said, how do you make sense of this? I mean, how do you live with this? And he was a very religiously observant person. He had actually started out, from a more religiously observant place than I had. And he said, listen, he said, you're going to think this is a joke, and he had also, by the way, been previously married to a woman. He said, guess what? The Torah says right here, if a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman. He said, I read the Torah literally, Mark. He says, I don't lay with a man the way I laid with a woman. It's not the same. So he said the issue might be actually trying to make a man be like a woman. And I thought, well, that also doesn't answer everybody's sexual behaviors, but I understood what his point was, which is that each person putting somebody into a situation where he wasn't saying it in sarcastically or facetiously. He literally meant that I understand, this is the way I read the Torah. I read it in a literal way, saying, yes, I don't believe that I'm lying with a man the way I lie with a woman. So that was his interesting take on it. I'll never forget it. So any other questions or comments about that in particular? Look,
yes.
it is here. I mean, you can't say that it's not here. It's here. It's Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, and it's here, Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13. They are here. And I, like every other part of the Bible that I have to deal with that makes me question again, and I have to come up with an answer, this is one of them.
What I have seen practicing family law with religious people, when I have a divorce and people are religious, they pick and choose. And they choose to ignore the adultery, and they pick the homosexuality. And that is what I've noticed with every person, religious person that I've represented in a divorce where there has been adultery.
Well, you can tell them in the Torah, it is the same punishment.
Oh, I do. I know that, but it doesn't matter. They just,
Yeah.
you know, a la carte.
Yeah. So again, it's not only a la carte, it's the same chapter. It's
Yeah.
the same chapter. Now, again, look, I mean, if I was gay and I had to, and you hear it, people say, hey, listen, I have to deal with the fact that you've lumped homosexuality together with incest and with
Bestiality.
and bestiality. I understand the point of saying, wow, this is really, you know, this is not a comfortable section for me to read. I get that. I would never, believe me, I would never try to tell you or attempt to rationalize it when it's not my issue, because it's not fair for me to defend or argue on the behalf. I've shared with you what people have told me, but I will tell you this. It is the context of it, and it is in the sense that all of these non-procreative acts, but there are a lot of other non-procreative sexual acts that, again, the rabbis could have included it here without, they didn't want to get into long descriptions of them. But the reality is that if sleeping with a woman who's menstruating is included in the same section, it's clearly that's the issue. It's the non-procreative act. And it began with this issue of child sacrifice, which is the ultimate non-procreative act.
But adultery can be procreative.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had divorces where that's what happened.
Yeah. No, there's no question. But the answer of how did it fit into, okay, so yes, so not all of them are non-procreative, though you can make the argument that there is a, and this is the argument that's made, I'm not making this, but the rabbis would have said, look, if you're having sex with a woman who's married to somebody else, first of all, you're doing something unethical. Obviously, you're doing something immoral. You're stealing somebody else's property, if you will. All of those things that, you know, you could make the argument from the ancient world. All of these things were there. But there's another issue. That kid, if that woman got pregnant, is not your kid.
That's right.
It's the father. It's the one that she's married to. So
Yeah,
it's still a
and
non-procreative act because it's not you've wasted your seed on something that's not yours.
And you're right. That, I'm sorry to yell, that is California law. If a woman is married, has sex with another man, and becomes pregnant and has a child, the child is presumed to be the child of her husband, and the husband has 2 years under the law to set that aside.
Well, thank you, Philip, for giving us a legal ruling.
Mark, is there a line?
I hope everybody heard that. We're very lucky to have Philip with us.
But that's really almost biblical. It really speaks to what you just said, Rabbi.
Yeah, this is the issue for you,
Mark.
for us. Yeah. Bob.
Is there a line in there? It talks about sleeping with a married woman. Doesn't talk about a married man sleeping with a single woman, or does it? Did I miss that one?
Oh, you didn't miss it. It's what Phyllis already alluded to. No, so, I mean, look, in the biblical period, polygamy was still allowed, so you couldn't stop that. But by the rabbinic period, so from not when this was written, but by the time the rabbis were discussing this, the rabbis they couldn't prohibit polygamy because it's biblical. It's a biblical law. It allows for it in the Bible. The answer is that the Torah, so they couldn't abrogate it. They couldn't say the Torah doesn't allow it anymore because the Torah does. The rabbis discouraged it and said it's not a good practice to engage in. It causes problems, and it's not. If we look at the Bible, whenever we see there's plural marriage, there's always problems. And so they said it's not a good thing to do. In the Islamic world today, you're allowed to have, in most countries, you're allowed to have up to 4 wives unless you're incredibly wealthy and can prove that you have some type of need to have 4 wives. So if you're a ruler of a country, you could have more than 4 wives. But if you are a normal person, let's say living in Egypt or Syria, you can have up to 4 wives. Now, I've talked to Muslims who live in those countries and deal with polygamy. Look, it's their practice, and they'll tell you that it's something that they've always had and always practiced. But clearly, in our day today, and especially with the way the world is connected, it's very, very problematic. And it's not. Most of those countries are not encouraging polygamy. They're allowing it. Israel allowed it for people who moved to Israel who already were polygamous. Right? You're going to say, how the heck did that happen, right? Because Judaism never outlawed polygamy. What Judaism did is the rabbis of Europe, which most of us are Ashkenazi Jews, most of our community outlawed polygamy officially 1,000 years ago, when the rabbis basically came up with a law that says if you live in a Christian country, you have to follow Christian law on this, and you can't be married to more than one person. And he is not, and it is not a Jews who lived in Morocco and mostly North Africa, I guess Libya and all those Jews who lived there came to Israel. They were allowed, if they had been married to more than one woman, they were allowed to continue their marriages. But Israel said, in Israel, we're not going to allow it. So according to Israel law, civil law, you're not allowed to marry more than one person. And so it's against the law. But Israel allowed those marriages. And I think most of those people who came there, most of those people now are deceased. I mean, the last very few women in their 90s, I mean, because their marriage had to have been enacted before 1948. So they had to be married for more than 72 years in order to still be in a polygamous marriage. So
what about people that come from like Yemen now that may have plural marriages and then they come to Israel?
Israel hasn't brought too many Jews lately. They have brought a few families in who somehow got left behind, but almost all the Jews from Yemen. So yeah, Yemenite Jews were allowed to. There's so few now that hardly any of them have plural marriages. It hasn't been an issue. But yes, if you come to Israel if you were married outside of the country, they kind of grandfathered you in. Yes, but as Marina has pointed out to me, again, reminded me that Islamic law still does not prohibit women being taken in battle from not being treated as sex slaves. So it is, Judaism never allowed that. And we read that last week, and we'll read it again. We'll read it again several times, including the beginning of Parshat Ki Teitzei in Deuteronomy is all about going into battle and making sure that you don't take women in battle as basically sex slaves. All right, so the Torah is definitely engaged in reminding us about who we can be married to and who we can sleep with. In some cases, it's not again about marriage here. It's really about, in many cases, just sleeping with, just the sex act. But here you have, if a man marries the wife of his brother, it is indecency. It is the nakedness of his brother that he has uncovered. They shall remain childless. As Mike pointed out last week, there is a law in the Torah, however, that if your brother dies and did not have a son, that you actually have to give your sister-in-law a child. But very importantly, that child is your brother-in-law's child. It's not your child. So in that case, it's 100% not really a marriage, and it is more of a surrogacy than it is. I mean, it's not a marriage. That's not what you're supposed to do, but you have to do it if the woman didn't have children. All right. So again, it talks about keeping the laws of kashrut, of the animals that you can't eat. We read about that a couple of weeks ago. And we have this repetition of this kadoshim formula, this holiness code, vihitem the kadoshim. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy. Ki kadosh ani. Adonai, I am holy, and I've set you apart from other peoples. And you are mine. We're God's people, and this is where we get this idea of chosenness. But as you can see, it's not just I love you, I think you're the best. You have to follow these laws because I have given them to you. And once again, we have this repetition of not consulting with ghosts or familiar spirits. So it's 2 times in the same portion. And that is Kedoshim. That is the portion we read a few weeks ago. We finished up now. So let's look at Parshat Emor, which is portion that we read actually last week, and that we're going to have a chance to read we're going to read some parts of this. It continues, by the way, with this line, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, and this is a very famous part of the Torah because it deals with the laws of the Levites in particular, the Kohanim and within the Levitical tribe, that they are not allowed to come in contact with the dead. The only people that a Kohen can come in contact with are the immediate relatives, mother, father, son or daughter, and brother. Those are the people that they also, and again, also a virgin sister, close to him because she is not married. So, Kohanim are not allowed to go to a funeral. If they're following the laws of the Kohanim. Yep, Bob?
It says the sons of the Levites too then, right?
So here it says, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron. So it's not the Levites. So
Okay.
later on, we're going to get to some of the Levitical laws, but this one was just for Kohanim. Again, it says they shall not shave any parts of their heads or cut the side growths of their beards, gas their flesh. We already had these commandments to all of the Israelites. So the fact that these are now directed to the Levites shouldn't really surprise us. Or the Kohanim, shouldn't say Levites. We're going to get to that in a second. It says specifically here, they shall not marry a woman defiled by harlotry. So a priest can't marry a prostitute. But here's the key thing, because again, not marrying a prostitute, that might be self-explanatory. Or I wouldn't say self-explanatory, but maybe, again, a priest shouldn't be marrying a prostitute, a former prostitute. But here's the problem. It's not just a prostitute. It is somebody who was divorced from her husband.
For they are holy to their God. Why are they holy to their God?
Look, this is a problem for Kohanim today. Most Kohanim don't follow this law anymore. But the idea that when you were a Kohen, that your descendants had to be pure. This is such an important idea in Judaism that you're not allowed to, and again, holy might be not the best translation. Set aside or set apart is maybe a better word. It also conveys even the sense of taboo sometimes, like something that kadosh is something that you're not supposed to come in contact with. People here are not allowed to have a child with a woman whose paternity might come into question. Now, you would say today, we know that if a woman has sex with somebody more than 9 months ago, 10 months ago, 11 months ago, she's not pregnant with that guy anymore. They did not have that understanding during the biblical period. That's all I can tell you, is that they understood that it is possible for a person to literally to carry that seed from their previous husband with them. And that child that would have been yours, you'd think would be yours, would not be yours. And so they saw this as a real issue. Again, today, it's not an issue for us. We know about physiology, we know about this, but it's still a law for Kohanim who are Orthodox. Orthodox Kohanim cannot marry a divorcee or a widow. And this has happened to people in I know people that this has happened to. And it's a serious issue because you'd go like, well, what difference does it make? Well, if you're in your 60s 50s and you're divorced and you want to find somebody to marry, or you're widowed. You're telling me you have to marry a 20 or 25-year-old unmarried virgin? People will think you're a creep. In today, I mean, happens all the time in Hollywood. But if you're if you're a religious Jew who's trying to be observant of the Torah, this is a real problem. So I will tell you, and this is not speaking out of school, if you will. There's a very well-known rabbi who was a rabbi here in Beverly Hills for many years, an Orthodox rabbi who actually now lives back in LA, Rabbi Abner Weiss, wonderful man. He's the rabbi of Westwood Kehillah, but he was the rabbi at Etz Jacob for 20 years. He got divorced. He married a divorcee himself. He moved to England to become the rabbi of Marble Arch Synagogue, which is one of the top Orthodox synagogues in London. And when he got there, the synagogue fired him for marrying a divorcee because he was a Kohen, not because he was, any rabbi can marry a divorcee in the Orthodox world, but he's a Kohen. And they said to him, you violated the laws of the kahuna, of the law of priesthood, and they fired him. He came back here. And his argument was, I'm not really a Kohen. His argument was, our family tradition is not very strong. We can't establish it. But people knew that he used to say he was a Kohen. So they said, you can't have it both ways. You can't claim you were a Kohen before and now say, yeah, but it turns out that we're really not a Kohen. Because they knew what he was basically doing, which was saying, my status as a Kohen is in doubt. So I don't want to be a Kohen. I don't want to be considered a Kohen. He can't do it. So it caused him a lot of embarrassment, and he lost a job, and he's never had the same career after. So this is real. I mean, this isn't ancient history that people are, saying, well, what if? It's not a hypothetical ancient practice that we're people are dealing with this today, right now. If you're a Kohen and God forbid you're a widow or a divorcee, how do you get married again? So this is it's an issue. Now, by the way, you can go to a rabbi and say, hey, I don't think I'm a Kohen. Can I do? But people will be, they'll say, you might find a rabbi who's compassionate and say, well, yeah, you're probably not a Kohen, but it's not a guarantee, and it's not easy. Here's a punishment for a daughter of a priest who becomes a prostitute. Now, it could be, is this cultic prostitution or is it just common prostitution? The word that's used here, zanut, is common prostitution, streetwalker, escort. It is not cultic prostitution. There's a different word for that. That's not the word that's used here. Again, she's defiling her status as a priest. And the reason is, the priest who is exalted above his fellows, on whose head the anointing oil has been poured, and who has been ordained to wear the vestments, shall not bare his head or rend his vestments. He shall not go in where there is any dead body. He shall not defile himself, even for his father or mother. He shall not go outside the sanctuary and profane the sanctuary of his God. For upon him is the distinction of the anointing oil of his God, mine the Lord's. He may only marry a woman who's a virgin. A widow or a divorced woman, one who is degraded by harlotry, such he may not marry. Only a virgin of his own kin may he take to wife, that he may not profane his offspring among his kin, for I, the Lord, have sanctified him. So for the priest, who is the high priest, for the priest who is in charge of everything, the laws are even stricter. He can't even go to the funeral of his own parents. And again, you can see that what they're trying to do is protect people from being defiled, from having children that are maybe not theirs, from any way possible, from being from having any of their holiness be called into question. Now, these laws, by the way, we know that these are similar in other cultures, that other cultures elevated their priests, in some cases, made them celibate. And so if you want to know how the Christians came up with celibacy as a requirement for their priests, one of the answers is because pagans already did it. There were already pagan cults that required their priesthood, their initiated, to be celibate. Judaism never did that. but they did put requirements on their priests. Somebody want to say something? Yes, no?
Well, I mean, if the priesthood is hereditary through the paternal line, all of this makes perfect sense.
Except for one thing, which is going to upset you. I know you've read it before, Ronnie, and it upsets
I have.
others, because it's the next line. Speak to Aaron and say, no man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a defect shall be qualified to offer the food of his God. No one at all who has a defect shall be qualified. No man who is blind or lame or has a limb too long or short. No man who has a broken leg or broken arm, or who is a hunchback or a dwarf who has a growth in his eye, or who has a boil scar, or a scurvy or crushed testes. No man among the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a defect shall be qualified to offer the Lord's offering by fire. Having a defect, he shall not be qualified to offer the food of his God.
But they're still Kohanim and they're still special. They just can't serve in the temple.
Yes, spoken as somebody who's obviously come to terms with the law as it exists. Look, the reason that they couldn't, and again, it goes very much against our sensibilities today. Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, well, I've seen the ADA.
Well, listen, the problem is, as Ronnie's kind of getting at, the priests were only allowed, we were only allowed to offer, the priests are only allowed to sacrifice animals that are without defect. And so along that rationale is that the priests themselves have to be of as pure a state as they could possibly be. Again, it completely goes against our value system of saying that we can see beyond people's challenges. We don't even use the word handy. I mean, there's so many words that we won't even use anymore today. I mean, I don't even know if you can put the word dwarf in a translation of the Bible anymore. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. But the point is that this is so different from our understanding.
But midget, no.
Okay. Well, I'm just telling you, we might be getting to a point where, where we can't even do that. But again, as Ronnie said, it didn't mean their priesthood was not taken away. It wasn't that they were no longer priests. By the way, it's not just the way they were born. If they got scars or if they broke things and stuff like that, also disqualified. So it's not just you were born that way and we're discriminated against you. It's about coming in front of God with
damaged goods,
perfect form, if you will. So it does pose a problem. I will tell you that none of these things ever prohibited anybody from being later on, after we have priests, right? We have rabbis. No rabbinic leaders were disqualified because they had physical deformities, because I don't know too many rabbis who would qualify without going into graphic details. There's not many people, of course, we know today that are pure of form, but physical form at least. So I never disqualified anybody from they never applied these laws to other roles in Judaism. But these were enforced as long as there was a priesthood. These were enforced. Listen,
there's another perspective.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we read about Saras and Mitzara, those things were considered not just physical disabilities; they were considered a reflection of a spiritual impurity. So apparently, these people saw the possibility that a physical issue wasn't just a physical issue; it could also be a reflection of spiritual impurity. And they didn't want someone who was impure to be offering sacrifices to God.
Yeah. Again, other than the fact that, it's tough for us to get into that frame of mind. Let's put it that way. again, thankfully, we don't have to deal with this. I will tell you this. The last time we had high priests, does everyone know, by the way, who the last high priests were? Anybody?
Haven't got a
Nope.
clue.
Nobody? The last high priests were during the Roman, were during the Roman period. But those high priests, we had about 40 high priests in the period of about 10 years, because every season or so, the Romans would appoint whoever gave them the most money to be the high priest. But up until that time, we had a family called the Hasmoneans, otherwise known as the Maccabeans. And what they would, what the Maccabees did is the oldest son, the king, well, they became kings. Simon was the first. He was the high priest, but he later on called himself king. And what happened, of course, as you have with any dynasty, is you have brothers that start fighting with other brothers. And so what happened was, when two of those brothers, Aristobulus and Antigonus, that were about 50 years before Herod the Great, when they went to war against each other, and each one wanted to be high priest, and there was a time when it kind of went back and forth over a couple of years. This was just before the Roman ascension, just before Julius Caesar time. So Julius Caesar's alive, but he hasn't conquered things yet. So that's the time period we're talking about. So what happened, of course, is that Aristobulus, one of the brothers, was king, and he actually captured his brother when they were in battle, and he cut off his brother's ear. And the reason he cut off his brother's ear was because he wanted to make sure that if his brother ever revolted again, he could never be high priest. So this was put into, I mean, this isn't theoretical. This wasn't theoretical. This was actually used as a tactic to make sure that somebody couldn't be a high priest. So you could not kill somebody, but basically render them no longer able to be a priest because of, again, this law of the Torah being obvious. Now, again, there could be physical imperfections, of course, that nobody saw, but you saw crushed testes as one of them, and that's a pretty personal, that's a pretty personal physical challenge to have. But there were some that were so obvious. You know, if you scarred somebody on the face, or if you, again, took off their ear, can't be any more obvious than that. So these were laws of the priesthood. And again, it's one of the reasons why we're not in a big hurry to reinitiate the priesthood, or at least most of us are not. So let's take a look. We're going to go up a little further. You can see none of Aaron's offsprings who had an eruption or a discharge shall eat of the sacred donations until he is clean. If one touches anything made unclean by a corpse, or if a man has an emission of semen, or if a man touches any swarmy thing by which he is made unclean, or any human being by whom he is made unclean, whatever is uncleanness, that person who touches shall be unclean until evening, and shall not eat of the sacred donations unless he has washed his body in water. So they took these laws pretty seriously. Even if you touched a lizard or picked up a dead mouse, you're unclean. You have to actually go through you have to go through a mikveh in order to be able to go back to work and even eat of these things. Goes through here, talks about what happens when a priest's daughter marries a layman, someone who's not a priest. So generally speaking, priests' families married within the family. You're supposed to marry within your kin if you're a priest. So if a priest's daughter marries out, she loses the ability to continue to function as a priest. She is now she's now in a status of no longer, she's a almana grusha. She's no longer part of the family, so to speak, and she's not part of the business. So there would be well, it sounds like they're in the mafia, but it really is a sense of you're not part of the family anymore when you marry out. and they were not allowed to. Their kids were no longer priests. So it's kind of a way to keep the family together, and the women, encouraging the women to still be priests, because they lose their cut once they're outside of that. Once they married outside. Let's continue on. Again, here we have another one of these laws that we've read, even again back in Exodus. Your offerings have to be without blemish from cattle, sheep, or goats. You shall not offer anything that has a defect. So don't give your messed up cows that already are not going to be fit to eat or fit to be sold. You can't bring those to the temple. You got to bring your best. Now let's take a look at this, because this is one of the most famous parts of Emor, chapter 23, which is a list of the holidays. And I did want to get to this today. This is a section that deals with the list. We have a list of holidays. So this is the first time we have it in the Torah. It's not the only time. It's the first time in the Torah that we get a list of the holidays. So we get here into Leviticus towards the end, and we get this list. And let's take a look at them, shall we? So it starts off with the holiday we celebrate every week, Shabbat. Speak to the Israelite people. These are the fixed times. 6 days of work may be done, but on the 7th day shall be a Sabbath of complete rest. This is your Shabbat. That is the first thing given, is Shabbat. And then we get to what we call the Moadeh. These are the fixed times, set times. These are the holidays. And they are Mikra Kodesh. They are days that are sacred. Again, the word Kodesh. And here is the first holiday. Of course, you're going to say it's Rosh Hashanah. No, it's not Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah is not the beginning of the year. In the biblical period is absolutely right. Ronnie Nathan is reminding us that the first month in those days was the month of Nisan, the springtime. And during the early part of the biblical period, it changes obviously later on. The Egyptians followed a calendar that began in the spring, which is why we see in the Torah. But by the time the Jews were in exile and very much under the Babylonian sphere of influence, they followed a calendar that began in the fall. And so they had moved to a fall-based calendar. And here's, again, the first holiday we have. The first day of the first month, the 14th day of that month, at twilight, at nighttime, is your Passover. And on the 15th day of the month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Oh, wait a second. Which holiday are they talking about? Because I just heard 2 holidays. There were 2 holidays, folks. And we combined them. And we combined them so well that most people don't even know that we celebrate every year at Passover 2 ancient holidays that were brought together at the same time and celebrated around the same time, but eventually, again, become one holiday. There was the Feast of Passover, when you offered a Passover offering. And then on the next day was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the holiday of Matzot. So now you learn something that people don't like to talk about, which is that there are 2 holidays and they were brought together. The most important thing to remember is that it was an attempt in our ancestors' days to bring 2 spring holidays together that were very, very, very important. And they wanted them celebrated together. So the first step was to celebrate them at the same time. And then over time, they just became the same holiday. Nobody ever said, oh, wait, there are 2 holidays here. So today, when we pull it apart, it's only because the Torah kind of tells us when the Torah was written that this was still in the process of happening, bringing together 2 holidays. And there we have it. It's pretty obvious. There's 2 holidays. And it tells us that on the holiday of Matzot, the Lord's Feast of Unleavened Bread, on the first day is a Mikra Kodesh. You shall not work at your occupations. And 7 days you shall make offerings of fire to the Lord. The 7th day shall be a sacred occasion. Oh, by the way, I just want to point out, I do need to tell you this, that we combine them together so well that in Israel, according to the Bible, because they follow the biblical 7 days of the holiday, in the diaspora, we celebrate it for an 8th day. but it's not because it's 1 day plus 7 days. In Israel, and for thousands of years, we start eating matzah. I'm not going to tell you a secret right now. I'm really close to the camera, but I do want to tell you it's not a secret. You start eating matzah at sundown on the 14th day of Nisan. Okay, so just so you know, you've been doing it the way we've been doing it for a long time, which is it's a 7-day holiday. It's not 1 day plus 7 days. Well, it is, but in Israel, and according to the Torah, it's 7 days. We just celebrate the matzot the same night that we celebrate the Pesach holiday. And nobody says anything about it, except for I just did. So that's the secret that's not really, it's not a secret, it's just people don't talk about it. So let's
What the heck?
I'm just telling you, all right. So let's now talk about, oh my goodness gracious, what we're doing right now, which is bringing the Omer. Speak to the Israelite people. When you enter the land that I'm giving you and reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest, and he shall elevate that sheaf before the Lord. The Hanif et Omer lifnei Adonai. Bring your sheaf, and he elevates it. And on the day you elevate the sheaf, you shall bring a burnt offering. And then it goes on with the offering that you're supposed to bring. And from that day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. Now, I know Mike Schwartz is all ready to go, Mike, right? Mike, what do you want to tell us about this?
What do I want to tell you about this?
About the Omer starting on the Shabbat.
Oh yeah, it would. It's iffy. I don't like that.
It's iffy because the Torah is commanding us to do something that we don't do anymore.
Exactly.
Which is that Shavuot had to begin. The count off for Shavuot was on Shabbat.
But it shouldn't be.
The day after Shabbat is the next day. So the first day was that day, and then 49 days later. It was always on a Sunday, Shavuot. Always.
Right.
In the Bible, it was always on a Sunday. Always. Never didn't change. Shavuot was a holiday that had nothing to do, to some extent then, with what day of the calendar it was. It had to do with what day of the week it was when you started the count off. So
it was also a harvest back in biblical time too.
For sure. And this is clearly about a harvest. And again, because we're not farmers, most of us, again, it's hard for us to really wrap our heads around, what it means to count the Omer, but it is what it is, folks. This was a period of time where we counted off the sheaves, and it was more than 50 days sometimes, because if Passover started on a Tuesday, then if the 14th of Nisan was a Tuesday, then Shavuot, then the count off for Shavuot didn't start until later. So technically speaking, Shavuot could have been 55, 54 days after Passover started. So again, without getting too confusing, Shavuot was not dependent on a day of the calendar. So 14th day of Nisan, no, not an issue. All right. But it was, again, as Mike says, very much a harvest holiday. And when that time was over, when you counted up those days, again, the offerings are there. It says that on that day, shall be a sacred day when you come to the end of these weeks, which are Shavuot. I mean, it doesn't actually say Shavuot here, but it does say weeks. So the holiday isn't, it says right here, Etashvi'it on the 70th, on the seventh week, and you count off 50 days, then it's another holiday. It's really important to understand that Shavuot was a extra day, to some extent, of Passover. It really was the harvest period comes to an end at Shavuot. Is it really an independent day from Passover? Not really, because it doesn't really even have a name. It doesn't say this day is Shavuot. It says this is the day of counting off, and at the end of it, it's a sacred day. And it says that. you know, it's a sacred day, and you bring your offerings, and you do the same things you do at other holidays. You bring your offerings of your 2 lambs, you got your goat for sin, you got your sacrifices. Again, sacred occasion for all time. So Shavuot is a biblically mandated holiday. It's a holiday that we're going to celebrate in 2.5 weeks. We want everybody to join us. It's not 2.5 weeks, it's 2 weeks and a night. We're going to be doing Shavuot, and I will post up. You're all going to get an email about it tomorrow, but we're doing our study session with Congregation Beth Shalom. And we normally do it started out, we did it in our homes. The 2 rabbis would host, and then it moved into the sanctuary, into the synagogues. And now we've evolved. We're doing it on Zoom. And because it's their turn to host, they're hosting the Zoom. So, yeah, you'll all be getting a flyer about this coming up. As a matter of fact, because I'm the mentality of having my computer right here, I'm going to hold it 1 second. I'm going to be so swift on this. By the way, folks, we're having a cooking class first. Before Shavuot, we have a cooking class. That's our pre-Shavuot event. We're going to have a cooking class, and then we're going to have a. Are you going to teach how to make begelach? We're going to have a cooking class to teach. It's not my choice.
But isn't begelach Shavuot food?
Yeah. We're having blintzes and cheesecake.
My grandmother used to make that stuff. I haven't had it in years.
Yeah, everything I can eat, Rabbi.
I didn't decide it. It was a decision of it's a decision of our ancestors, the rabbis who made these decisions of what foods we eat.
Well, didn't they know that I can't eat that stuff?
Didn't they know that we would all be that we'd be pre-diabetic? And look at this great Shavuot celebration flyer. Here's our Zoom meeting for Shavuot. Look, I wanted to do it all night this year. I thought if we're going to do it all night, this is the year to do it when we don't even have to leave our homes. But I was vetoed on that by, I wasn't vetoed on it, but it didn't seem like Beth Shalom was interested in doing a thing after darkness online. So I'm not going to put anybody into a situation that they don't feel comfortable with.
Well, we can always just go over to our own Zoom and just do it the rest of the night.
Listen, there's going to be, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to post the Zoom sessions that are at other places where they're doing it all night. Look, the last time that I did a late night one was 3 years ago. We were in Boston for my daughter's graduation. So first time I'd been away from a holiday from Temple Beth Ami in 20 years. And so literally 20 years, 18 years. So we went to, we were in Boston, and we went to all like synagogue, like 12 synagogues in Brookline and Boston. We're doing a Shavuot study session, and we stayed until just after midnight. They had classes going all night, but they had a lot. They started off with maybe 1,000 people, and it just kind of petered out. But they had all these sessions going on. They had, different classes. They had cooking classes. They had different tracks. They had Bible classes. They had Kabbalah classes. They had all these different classes going on. It was very cool. And it's something that we've done them in LA, in Pico Robertson area and some other areas, but it is not as big in the West Coast as it should be, unfortunately. But Shavuot is the time that we study, and as I like to remind people, it was my first date with Tracy at Oxford. We went out on Shavuot. We went out to dinner, and it was followed by a study session, and it was really cool, actually. You went to there's 37 colleges at Oxford, and about 10 or 12 of them or something had study sessions at different. They found different college residents at different colleges, Teddy Hall and St. Margaret's and whatever. They had one person from each college hosted in their room, in their college room. They had a Shavuot. It was a drinking party, but they had different houses, different every place they had things set up, and we actually went to a lot of them. We went to a lot of the colleges, and it was really fun. I mean, it was a nice experience of celebrating in a different country. It was also one of the few years that I was not at home for the holidays, and it was really fun. It was literally it was our first date though. It was June 6th, and it was our first date, and the rest is history. Isn't that a romantic story that we had our first date on Shavuot? Nobody cares. It's a holiday that nobody cares about, but anyways, it's a beautiful story. I don't know. It is what it is. Shavuot has got a special place in my heart. So let's talk about the other holidays here, which is the one that you all know and you all love to celebrate. I don't know why we love celebrating, because here in the Torah, it is a afterthought. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a complete rest. A sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. Sounds a lot like
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, okay.
You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall bring an offering by fire. And that's it. The Lord spoke to Moses on the 10th day as the day of what? Because I just read 2 lines. I read 2 verses. You're not incorrect. Our ancestors would not have believed that those were the holidays that we really decided to take on. Because here's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur's got a total of 4 verses. Mark the 10th day of the 7th month as a day of atonement. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You practice self-denial, and you shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work, for it is a day of atonement, on which expiation is made on your behalf before the Lord. It doesn't say anything, by the way, about what you do. It says that the priests are making expiation, and of course you fast, but doesn't say anything here about you making sacrifices. Indeed, any person who does not practice self-denial shall be cut off from his kin. That same word that Ronnie pointed out, what does it mean? Does it mean you get cut off in this world or the next world? Well, we don't really know, but it's the same word. It's karet. The punishment is being cut off. And whoever does that any work, I will cause that person to perish from among his people. Okay, so it goes on a couple more lines. I kind of exaggerated, but that's it. Do no work, says it kind of again. A Shabbat of complete rest. Practice self-denial, fast. It doesn't say fast, but practice self-denial. We understand that to be fasting, and that's it. The next line is Sukkot. So that's Yom Kippur. That's Yom Kippur. That was Rosh Hashanah. I just want to point out that the laws of the Omer are longer than the laws of Rosh Hashanah and Shavuot. I mean, I'm just showing you. I just want you to see it with your own eyes. Verses 9 through let's say Shavuot includes, let's include a holiday that nobody celebrates anymore. Verse 9 all the way through to verse 22. 13 verses about Omer and Shavuot. Again, essentially a continuation of the Passover holiday, but 13 verses. And then when we get to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we've got one, starts in verse 23, which is again, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, but let's include that. 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, and that's it. So 9 verses, 10 verses total, 10 verses, let's say, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And those are the holidays that we keep, most of us keep today. It's crazy. It is not what you'd expect based on what the Torah has to say. Because then we get into Sukkot, this wonderful holiday, again, that I love, but most people don't talk that much about. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of the 7th month, there shall be a feast of booths to the Lord the last 7 days. Sounds a lot like Passover. 7-day holiday. By the way, as a little secret here, what was the level of importance of the holiday? You keep it for a week. You keep Rosh Hashanah for a day. You keep Yom Kippur for a day. You keep these holidays of Passover and Sukkot for a week, which means they're probably pretty important. We want everybody to participate in them. We want everybody to do something for these. On the 15th day, there shall be a feast of booths, right? Don't work on your occupations. Same thing like the other holidays. Shall be 7 days of bringing offerings, a lot of offerings. On the 8th day, you shall have a solemn occasion. It's a sacred occasion. Bring an offering. We call that day, solemn gathering. We call that Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day, which in many ways sounds a lot like what Shavuot is, a delayed Atzeret. So you have 50 days between the end of Passover, or roughly 50 days, roughly 50, between Rosh, I say roughly because may not have been originally, 50. And by the way, the Karaites took that law literally and wouldn't celebrate Shavuot on any day but that 50th day after that Shabbat. But you've got right here, folks, 7 days plus an 8th day, which again, Shavuot seems to be the Atzeret, seems to be the extra day for Passover. It's just delayed by 50 days, roughly. So the 8th day is also a sacred occasion. That is the law here in Emor about Sukkot, but it's not over actually. Let's look at this. These are the set times set aside for sacred occasions, etc. But look at this. It comes back to Sukkot. There's more, but wait, there's more. On the 15th day, the 7th month, when you've gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival, which is, again, Sukkot. Sukkot is a holiday of booths, but there seems to have been another reason to celebrate the holiday, which is that there was a time for also doing something that you all know is gathering together the lulav. And on the first day, you shall take the product of the hadar trees, the branches of palms, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. That is the lulav that you take together. You shall observe it as a festival for the Lord for 7 days, right? You shall live in booths for 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths. And here it says specifically, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I, the Lord and your God. So it says specifically why we live in those booths. But I do want to point out, folks, again, by square yardage in the Torah, Sukkot's got a lot more yardage than Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more verses about Sukkot. So you have more verses in the Torah about Sukkot than you do about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur put together. Because if you had these 7 verses, with these other verses, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, or not those, sorry. These ones right here. The ones that start right after here. So 34, 35, 36, 37, and then it continues on again. You know, even if you don't include these lines right here, 37 and 38, picks back up in 39. So it's pretty much, I mean, you know, look, we can argue, we can split hairs, but basically 34, from verse 34 all the way down to verse 43 is on a lot of text is about how do we celebrate Sukkot. It's a lot of lines. It's pretty important. So that is the laws of the holidays. Those are the holidays that we have according to the Torah. So Kelly asked the question, why are these holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur so important to us today? And that is an important question. When you look at Parshat Emor, You have to ask that question, because if you look at the way the Torah lays it out, you never would expect that those holidays, which basically doesn't tell us anything. You blow the shofar, you practice self-denial on Yom Kippur, and you let people offer expiation for you at Yom Kippur. And, you know, that's it. So how did this happen? How did we wind up with these holidays becoming so important? And the answer is, in a very weird way, I think what you have to say is that our ancestors probably included within this, for us at least, a chance for us to find a connection to God that may not be the way that they had their connection to God, may not have been the way that they would have connected, but they actually allowed us to find a way in our own day to connect in a way that would maybe speak to our generation. Now, I will tell you, part of it is this sad fact, which is that most people today don't have the patience to celebrate a holiday for a week. And I don't mean just Jews. I mean, the reality is let's not say that this is our problem. Think about how many holidays we have in the Christian calendar that are more than a day. Can't think of any. So we don't have the patience to observe a holiday in our society like that. Now, with all due respect, Muslims observe Ramadan for a month. Not every Muslim, but a lot of them do. So it's possible for people in today's world to observe holidays for more than a day. But most of us who live in Western society don't have the wherewithal, don't have the patience or stamina to be in a holiday period for more than a day. We just don't. Our culture doesn't accommodate it. And we
Bosses won't allow it.
go nuts. But guess what, Phyllis? You've been locked up in your house for over 40 days.
Yeah, but she's been with me, so it's been very, very fun.
I love the fact that you had to tell us that. No, I'm sure she would agree. But the point is that it's possible. We've all learned that we're capable of doing things that we couldn't do. Now, I will tell you, until I sat Shiva a couple of years ago for my mom, I didn't know if I could stay in a house for a week. I really didn't know. And I basically did. I've told people before, I did one funeral I had to officiate for a funeral, which I probably didn't have to, but I didn't feel comfortable saying no. Probably should have, but I didn't. And I don't regret it. So I don't want to say I should have. I don't regret doing it, but I could have. But it was the only time I left the house in a week. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could do that for a week. Now, again, I have been out of the house. I've gone to the grocery store. I've picked up food. I've done the same things that many of you have done. But let's face it, for the last month and a half, I've been in my house like you have and learned that it can be done. I've learned not necessarily to sit still, because I'm still watching television and I'm still looking at my computer and I'm doing all these other things, but it has taught me that I can sit still. I will tell you this, it's very hard to have Shabbat feel the same way now as it did normally. Shabbat is not the same for me under these conditions as it is normally. Partly because I'm resting more than not resting more, but I'm not as tired maybe, or I'm not as wistful, if you will, for Shabbat as I am normally, because I am on some days, not today in particular, but other days, last night, for example, that wasn't a good, Monday, when we celebrated Tracy's birthday, I was able to spend more time with her on her, during that day. And she was able to spend more time. She worked, but she also had more time she wasn't out of the state or out of out of her house. So it really has taught us that this experience has taught us that we could conceivably observe holidays in a way that we didn't think we could before. So I do think that this is an interesting experiment. It's been interesting lesson for many of us of what we are capable of doing that we didn't think we could do, or that we didn't, well, obviously we didn't want to do, but that we are capable of doing things that we thought we couldn't do, or we would joke, there's no way that I could ever do this. So, just keep that in mind, that maybe we will see people observing holidays differently than they have in the past. I don't know. I think holidays still have to speak to us to some extent. We still have to find meaning in the holidays, but it's definitely interesting how today we may be viewing, or from now on, we might be viewing holidays a little bit differently. It's just something to think about. Anybody have any other comments or questions about the holidays? Because we're going to move on. We are going to finish up and read a little bit more. I don't know if we're going to finish everything, but because we haven't gotten into the last portions. But I will tell you that there's a lot in the last portions that we're going to read, and we have about a half hour more. There is a lot of these portions, the last two portions, Bachar Bechukotai, that are very repetitious, which is why they're double portion. They're also very short. They're the last portions of Leviticus, and they only take up a couple of chapters. But I will tell you that there is another narrative here in the book of Leviticus at the end of Parshat Emor, which is unique because, again, we don't have stories for the most part of Leviticus, but we do have this strange story of a half Israelite person. It says, there came out among the Israelites one whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian. And a fight broke out in the camp between the half Israelite and a certain Israelite. So it's between an Israelite and Israelitish person, as it sometimes says in the translations, and an Israelite. So that it's interesting that they don't say that he's a full Israelite. Probably, again, because during the biblical period, it wasn't who your mother was, it was who your father was. So the story really is not between two Israelites. It's between an Israelite person and a person of Israelite descent, but not an Israelite. Here's what happens. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name of God in blasphemy, and he was brought to Moses. Now his mother's name was Shalomit, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. And interestingly, we read about using God's name in vain just yesterday in our Midrash class. And here is somebody who definitely used God's name improperly. And he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made clear to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is God's rendering of judgment, take the blasphemer outside the camp and let all who are within hearing lay their hands upon his head and let the whole community stone him. And to the Israelite people speak thus, anyone who blasphemes his God shall bear his guilt. Well, we already knew that. We knew from the 10 Commandments that you were not supposed to blaspheme. You were not supposed to take God's name in vain. And that's what the root of the word is here. It is still this idea of taking God's name in vain. If he pronounces the name, he shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him, stranger or citizen. If he has thus pronounced the name, he shall be put to death. A wonderful scene in Monty Python's Life of Brian of the high priest stoning to death somebody who said God's name in vain. And he ends up saying the name and they end up stoning him too because got him to say the name. So anyways, the point is that this is a serious law. It is a violation of the 10 Commandments. And it has been proposed that the reason that this story is here as a story is because there is a theory that was proposed by one of my professors in college, David Noel Friedman, who said that the Torah actually has the 10 Commandments laid out for us in Exodus. And in the next books of the Bible, every one of the 10 Commandments gets broken. Every one of them in very public and known ways. And the reason that this one is here, which seems like a more obscure one of the commandments, is because the writers of the Bible, or at least the editors of the Bible, wanted us to see how the 10 Commandments get broken. And then what happens after all the 10 Commandments are broken? Then we get exiled. The exile was punishment for us breaking the law of the covenant almost verse by verse. So we got here to Leviticus, and you say to yourself, Okay, well, this is the third commandment. What happened? What happened already, folks? How did they break the other two commandments? Very public?
Golden calf.
Yeah. So golden calf was a breaking of either the first commandment or the first two commandments, depending on how you order it. That's Exodus. Here's Leviticus. Well, we also have in coming up in the book of Numbers, we have a story of a guy who gets killed for violating Shabbat, which is the next commandment. So we literally go through the Bible book by book and watch how somebody breaks the law and then is punished with. Now we don't. The one kind of fault with his theory, and it is a theory, by the way. We'll never have proof, but it's an interesting theory. Because we don't really have a law. We don't have a story of a child violating the honoring your father and mother, but we do have a punishment in Deuteronomy that says if you have a wayward or defiant son that you're allowed to kill him, which isn't exactly a story, but it does say that there's a case where this would happen. So it doesn't really follow necessarily, but every one of the other stories. And what is the example that he uses of the adultery? King David and Bathsheba. Very public and very obvious, very, very obvious story of adultery. Stealing, you have terrible stories of theft, but one of the most famous ones is the story of the theft of the field of Ahab ends up stealing the field from somebody, and it's a very obvious case of theft on a public level. But again, we go through these and watch our ancestors violate every one of the 10 commandments in order. So that's the theory. So this is why we may have this law specifically of taking God's name in vain. So let's look at the last portions in the last 20 minutes or so that we have here today. Bahar Bahukotai. So these last sections, which again go from chapter 25, to, I'm going to show you to the very end because it's not very long. There's Bahukotai, and it ends right here at the end of chapter, right here, chapter 27. Is it
34?
No, that's chapter 27, verse 34. So these last three chapters, Bahar Bahukotai, are usually read, almost always read as together. It's a double portion, but it's usually read together. And these portions, these last chapters of Bahar Bahukotai cover one concept, pretty much almost only dealing with one concept, which is a concept that we actually have read already, but it's one that is dealt with in great detail here, which is, anybody? One of my great Torah scholars? What is chapter 25 through 27 about? It begins with God spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. We're still here at Mount Sinai. Bahar Sinai, that's what the word Bahar means. A fifth word of the portion is Bahar. Bahar Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people. And it says, when you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. This is the law of the sabbatical year. The year that the land has to come to rest. What we call Shemitah, the law of Shemitah. This is primarily what these last three chapters deal with. And it's pretty much the theme throughout these last chapters. It's dealing with something that, again, today we can make the argument we don't come into contact with a lot. Well, really never unless we're visiting Israel during a Shemitah year. And during the Shemitah year, we have the law of the Torah, which only deals with the land of Israel, which is that in the seventh year, for 6 years, you can prune, you can sow your field, you can prune your vineyard, gather and yield, bring in your harvest. But in the seventh year, the land shall have a Sabbath, a complete rest. The year is a sabbatical year. Shabbat, Shabbaton. The word is repeated twice. Shabbat, Shabbaton. And then it's repeated again, Sabbath of the Lord, Shabbat Ladonai. Your land is supposed to rest. Now, everybody's going to tell me right now, we know that crop rotation and giving the land a chance to rest is good, established agricultural practice. Well, it wasn't in the ancient world. And the Torah mandated it. And the Torah not only mandates it, but it specifically says that if you don't follow this law, you're going to be thrown out. And the land will end up having its sabbatical years anyways, because it'll get all those years that you're not there, it'll get its rest. One way or the other, the land will be treated with respect. And so this is a really interesting idea for us, which is that we're not just given the ability to do with the land anything we want. Now, Israel takes this law very seriously. The law of Shemitah is still practiced, or I should say is re-practiced in the land of Israel. For a long time, it was not enforced because the land was not under Jewish control. But now that Israel is once again under Jewish control, and this is the first time it's first laid out in Mishpatim, so this isn't like the first time. It was even in the code that was given earlier on when we got the Ten Commandments, that the Shemitah year was an important enough to be repeated several times in the Torah, and we have these last chapters. You have to understand that we take this in modern day Israel, it's taken seriously, and that it's not 7 years from when you plant. It's not the 7th year after you planted. You don't plant and then go, oh, I'm going to give I have to give my crops a rest in that 7th year. That's not what the law is. The law is that the entire land of Israel has to be rested during that period. So it does not, it's not like you can just decide, oh, well, I planted my field, and so I'm going to give it a rest when I decide it's going to be rested. You've got to do it. You've got to do it all at the same time. Everybody has to follow it, and it has nothing necessarily to do with when you planted you can plant your crops around this because you know that this is going to be an issue, but you don't get to say, well, I just planted my crops last year, and now you're making me give this whole next year a time to rest. The last Shemitah year was 6 years ago, which means that next year will be a Shemitah year. It will be interesting to see what happens given Corona and what effect that'll have on the economy. But next year is supposed to be a Shemitah. It's not supposed to be. It will be a Shemitah year. Now, you may ask yourself, well, does Israel force people to follow Shemitah year? Not necessarily. But I will tell you this. If you want to sell your produce in a kosher certified market in Israel, or for that matter, in a kosher certified market outside of Israel, you better follow the laws of Shemitah. You better follow that sabbatical year. So this is really important, that you don't have to. They don't enforce every kibbutz and every field. There's no Israeli police that walk around and say, you have to follow it. And I will tell you that Israel has figured out ways of not having this bring their country to a complete standstill. Because if a Palestinian is growing crops, let's say in Gaza or in a part of Israel that's not under Israeli control, the law doesn't go into effect for them. It does if you're a Palestinian worker on Israeli land inside Israel. But there are ways of kind of allowing crops to be grown nearby that will still be able to be eaten by Israelis. Israel
Wouldn't there
doesn't.
still be a shortage, though? Wouldn't there still be a shortage?
there is still shortages of produce, and Israel does its best to maintain and try to maintain prices during a Shemitah year. But it definitely goes up because during that time, much of
Everything has to be imported.
yeah, and much of it will be imported from places like Turkey and Egypt and countries that, you know, have on and off not had great relationships with Israel. I mean, Turkey used to have great relationships with Israel, and so it wasn't really a problem. But for a long time until about 13 years ago, so for the first 60, well, not exactly the first 60, for about 40 years of Israel's existence, Israel was able to grow crops in Gaza and bring them in and import them in from Gaza during the Shemitah year. Can't do that anymore. I mean, they could, but Gaza's a mess, so they can't do it anymore. But they could conceivably. If Palestinians ever go back to having normal type relations with Israel, it's possible that Israel will be able to have Palestinian grown produce, but it's probably going to have to be in areas like Gaza that were not occupied or not under Israeli control during the Second Temple period. Gaza was not under Israel control, was not under Jewish control, was not part of Judea during the Second Temple period.
What about Jordan?
Jordan would be fine. It is fine. Jordan doesn't have the production capabilities that Israel does, because they don't do the same water reclamation and they don't use the same drip irrigation. Though Israel has worked with Jordanian farmers there, it's not nearly as fertile. Look at a satellite map of Israel and Jordan, and look at an overview, and you'll see a green country and a very, very, very earth looking country. There's a green country and a very brown country next door. That's Jordan. So it's not. It's an interesting challenge for Israel, because Israel's become very good at crop rotation and at crop management, but it is an issue. There also is an issue that most of the farmers today that are working in Israel are not Jews, but it doesn't matter. The law is not about the farmers. It's about the land. So that's not a loophole. You can't say, well, I have Palestinian farmers that are working for me. You can't have them working the land of Israel during that Shemitah year. So again, there are people who don't follow the law. There are kibbutzim that didn't follow the laws of Shemitah necessarily. I mean, they still practice crop rotation and do, things that are smart farming techniques, but they don't necessarily follow the biblical injunctions. But again, they can't sell their produce, in certain in many markets in Israel that are going to be kosher certified. So the laws will actually say on them that this is the stamp on them basically says these are kosher fruits from the standpoint of nothing non-kosher inside of them. It's just the way they were harvested by farms that are observing Shemitah. Most of the farmers today, folks, in Israel are not Israeli and they're not Palestinian. Most of the farmers now that are working Israeli farms, not most, but the largest group of non-Israelis that are working farms, a large portion, and it's growing every year, are from Thailand.
Wow.
Yep. The amount of Thai workers now in Israel is enormous. And there was actually a fear about what was going to happen to them with Corona, because there's so many Thai workers. A lot of Palestinians used to work in Israel, but Israel has made it very hard for them. And again, it's been an interesting issue for Thai workers. I will tell you right now, there are the amount of Thai. This is according to Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper. So this is an Israeli newspaper. Doesn't say how many there are right now. I don't know how many are now kind of stuck in the country right now, but tens of thousands. So they are, again, in some cases, people are saying they're not being treated very well. There are definitely people in Israel who are advocating for them. And there are people watching and making sure that the workers are treated well. But again, like many countries, when you're importing labor from other countries, those people are oftentimes not taking, they don't take necessarily very good care of them. So, so it is, in 2012, there's 25,000 Thai workers were being brought. That's an old number. Actually, that's 2018. The story was, but it's more than that today. So it's interesting to know that this is what Israel is dealing with now, trying to follow these laws, but at the same time having to deal with a modern economy and the fact that Israelis are making too much money to be farmers today. They don't want to be farmers. So most kibbutzim are also dealing with this issue of transitioning into other types of manufacturing and production because the farms either don't make enough money or they have to bring in foreign workers to work there. Because it says right here, you may eat whatever's, you and your female slaves are hired and bound workers who live with you. So again, the laws are not there's not an exception for the workers. The workers have to follow off the same thing. And here we get into what we call the Jubilee year, which is that at the end of 7 weeks of years, so 7 times 7
It's 49.
is 49 years. In the 49th year, you sound the sound of a shofar. And on the 10th day of that month, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, you have a day of release. People get freed from their servitude, from their debts, from their loans, and from contracts that have forced them to not be in control of their own destiny. The Jubilee year was not 50 years or for the 49th year and in the 50th year from when you signed a contract or when your grandfather signed a contract. It was a nationwide Jubilee. So everybody in the country celebrated the Jubilee year the same year. So it wasn't on your 50th year, it was the country's 50th year. So it meant that almost everybody would live through most likely 2 Jubilee years, one as a kid and one as an older person. But it basically guaranteed that property would go back to the families, to the tribes where it started. It was a reset. It was a reset button every 50 years. And it's a huge, again, it's an interesting idea. I mean, some countries have talked about doing it. America's talked about having a release. But how could you possibly do it? How could you possibly do it today? But this concept of people not being permanently indentured was such an important idea that that Judaism shared with the whole world. And it really did share it with the whole world, because every group of people that read the Torah were inspired by these laws. And they were so inspired by this law that our ancestors, or at least our American forefathers, decided to take that line from chapter 25, verse 10, you shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. They liked 25:10 so much that they printed up the words Leviticus 25:10 and those words on the Liberty Bell. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all the inhabitants thereof. But they said, you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land and all the inhabitants thereof. And that became part of America's holy writings, holy texts. It is so important that millions of people go every year to look at those words on our Liberty Bell. But you see the context of it completely out of context. This is about the Jubilee year. This is about a release from debt and the ability for people to get to start over. Obviously, they thought when they were starting a new country that they were starting over. But it's more that they picked up on this idea that you have liberty throughout the land, to all the inhabitants, to everybody who lives there. That liberty is not just for the landowners, it's not just for the people in charge, but for everybody. So this is one of the most famous lines in the Torah because it's part of American history. It's from a completely obscure set of laws of the Jubilee year and the Shemitah year that we have in Leviticus. But yet our ancestors in America took it out of context. I mean, our Gentile Christian ancestors, our forefathers, and people like Benjamin Franklin that decided to appropriate different parts of the Bible, took this section out and made it part of our canon. And now you've read where it came from. So that's this week's Torah portion. It's something to think about, to meditate on, as we again had a chance to think about an election, and the fact that a fraction of our community decided to vote, but or even knew that they were supposed to be voting. But the fact that in a couple weeks we're going to be commemorating Memorial Day, and we'll have a chance to honor people who've paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. But this concept of liberty, of the word here is dror, which is not a common word in Hebrew. The word dror is not necessarily a common word, not a word that a lot of people would know. It's not a common was not a common name. It is a very common name in Israel. For the last 50, 60 years, the name dror, I can't even, really in Israel, you're supposed to say dror. It means freedom. And it's a very popular name for men in Israel. But interestingly, the name is probably connected to the word for sparrow. So in Hebrew, the word dror is also a sparrow. And again, this bird was seen as a symbol, like the dove is a symbol for freedom. That the dror sparrow was also seen as kind of a bird that flies in freedom. So it's interesting that that's the origin of the word freedom, or sparrow. It means both. So 50th year was the ultimate Shemitah year. It was the ultimate sabbatical year. It's a jubilee. Just so you know, I hope you all know, you know now, the word's used several times here. In Hebrew, the word is yovel. The word jubilee, folks, is a Hebrew word. Jubilee is the transliteration of our Hebrew, yovel. So whenever we use the word jubilee, the origin is in its 50th year was this jubilee, was this yovel. So that's the word jubilee, jubilant, all those words that come from the word yovel, Hebrew word. So we don't have a lot of Hebrew words that made their way into English. Amen is obviously one of them, but hallelujah. But yovel is another one of those words that is a Hebrew word that is a cognate, for a lot of English words. Here we have again, the yovel. So this is the theme of this last section. In the Jubilee year, each of you shall go back to your holding, to achuzato, your tribal holding. Achuzato means your tribal portion. You get to go back. You were allowed to sell your property, but in the 50th year, you were getting it back, which, by the way, means that probably people didn't have an easy time selling it, knowing that there was going to be a Jubilee year where you were going to get it back anyway. So people would probably count backwards, again, as it says, in buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only for the number of years since the Jubilee, and in selling to you, he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. So it definitely had an effect on transactions, on business. It says so right here. By the rabbinic period, folks, these laws were no longer in effect. By the rabbinic period, the rabbis had already figured we couldn't follow these laws anymore, and they stopped following them. They knowingly contradicted. And this is one of the few examples of it where the rabbis knowingly contradicted the laws of the Torah, where they weren't following Jubilee years anymore. They just basically said, we can't do it. We can't have people giving up property, having to give up property, because no one will go into business anymore. Who's going to loan money to somebody in the 47th year? All they have to do is wait it out. no one's going to do business. So once they were in a position where they couldn't live like this anymore, the rabbi said, we just can't follow this law, can't do commerce anymore. So they literally they knowingly violated this law. And again, it's because they literally couldn't do business. They couldn't keep it. And so by the rabbinic period, we have this term, it's called the prosbul, which is a literally basically saying that in the sabbatical year, in that 7th year, and again for the Jubilee year, that you no longer had to give up your debt, or you didn't have to remit your debt during that time. So how do the rabbis justify this? How do they justify violating the Torah? It's Rabbi Hillel, one of the greatest rabbis, says you can't follow this law. Because again, we're supposed to live by our laws.
So, Rabbi, getting back to the Karaites, do they follow this? They should.
I don't think they've ever given the prosbul as an answer for why they don't. It's an interesting question. I know for a fact that they engaged in commerce by the rabbinic period, but I think they came to the conclusion that because they weren't in control of the land anymore, that they didn't follow it. But I think for them, it was really more of a question of the law only applies to living outside the land of Israel.
Gotcha.
Prosbul in the Jubilee year. So I really think that they kind of they kind of came at it from another issue. I don't know what Karaites who live in Israel today. It's a good question. I don't know if Karaites
are there still Karaites in Israel?
There aren't many, but I mean, assumedly not assumedly, there are still some. There's got to be some. Whether it's a big issue because there's so few of them, but literally the rabbi said, if we don't come up with a solution for this, people won't be able to live. It doesn't benefit just the rich. The poor people who need to borrow won't be able to borrow. And so we can't have a law that's going to make life unlivable. And so it's a similar kind of idea that you can't create laws that people can't live by.
Was this agreed on by all rabbis, or was there a rift between a couple of the sages? I'm assuming the Talmud has that information.
Look, the Talmud says that because Hillel came up with it, and Hillel was so important, that it became the law. And it was not, he didn't just come up with it. He says it in front of the council and Sanhedrin, right. So they all agree to it. So he institutes it. It says very clearly that he instituted. Did he institute it? We don't know, but it was definitely instituted by his period. Or the rabbis, at least other rabbis, wanted to say, we didn't invent it, and not some flunky rabbi did it. It was the Rabbi Hillel, who is the head of the Sanhedrin.
Right.
And his descendants were heads of the Sanhedrin. He's the one who came up with it. So it's almost like saying Moses came up with it.
Right.
What's a Karaite?
What?
What's a Karaite?
It's a little orange thing you eat with the salad.
That's funny, right?
Karaites are people who follow the Torah and they don't recognize the Talmud and the rabbinic writings as authoritative. They don't believe they have to follow those laws. So again, they're basically anti-rabbinic Judaism. There aren't many of them left, but
a bunch of them up in the Bay Area, though.
There are some in the Bay. There's some in the Bay Area. They maintain a synagogue up in the Bay Area. They keep the law of Shabbat strictly in that they don't light any lights at all on Shabbat, including candles. They don't have Shabbos candles. They're in the dark on Shabbos, completely in the dark. And they don't believe that, again, following the law of the Torah very literally. So I want to finish up with this because we actually read only a portion of Behar Behukotai. But I will tell you this. This is everything in Behar Behukotai is about the Jubilee year. I mean, literally, this is the theme of the portion. But it begins with the words in Behar that this happened at Mount Sinai, and then it ends with the words, Ela hamitzvot asher tzivah Adonai et Moshe el bnei Yisrael Behar Sinai. These are the commandments that the Lord gave to Moses for the Israelite people at Mount Sinai, which is, again, the entire book of Leviticus, the very, very, very beginning of the book, and this portion kind of is bookended with this comment that this all took place at Mount Sinai. Because again, this is the way that it began, the very beginning of Leviticus, right here when they were at the tent of meeting at the tabernacle at Mount Sinai. So this is never moves in Leviticus. We're there from the beginning until the end. And again, as we come to the end of the book, we say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, especially now. Everybody, be strengthened. And we also want to say, Tam v'neshalem, tehillah le'el borei olam. We give thanks to God, the creator of everything, the universe.
Amen.
And again, tonight, as we go into this last part of the Omer period, tonight is the 35th day. The 35th day of the counting of the Omer. What?
We're getting close.
We are. And you know what? It's so weird to count Omer during this time because, again, normally when we count off the Omer, we're maybe at night, we're coming home after a long day or whatever. But now it's literally like our countdown through through our quarantine and through, again, the hope that maybe sometime soon on the horizon that we're going to be done with this. So tonight, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat Omer. We thank you, God, for this mitzvah that we just read about tonight, about keeping the Omer, about counting these days and keeping track. Today is 35 days, which is 5 weeks exactly of the Omer.
Amen.
35 days. Yom Shehem Chamisha Shavuot LaOmer. That it's been 5 weeks since we started counting the Omer. 35 days. Oh my gosh. 2 weeks and a day left to go. Yes. Somebody was going to add. Somebody. Philip.
Amen.
Yes. Philip, did you want to say something before we go? Sorry. Unmuted.
Before you go, you got to tell me how you change your background.
You go, it's all different, but if you go under Zoom, are you in Zoom app right now?
Yeah.
So if you're in Zoom app,
It's in settings.
yeah, you go under settings. It's one way to do it. I would go under, you can go under preferences. What kind of computer are you on, Phyllis?
I don't know. Windows 10.
Then it's a setting.
Yeah.
You look for the little gear. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, if you tap on your screen, on the lower right side says more.
No.
Are you
No.
using the actual app?
I don't know what I'm using.
Are you in Safari? Are you in Explorer or are you in Zoom?
I clicked on what you put in the e-blast.
What if you did?
Oh, she doesn't have the app. I think you need to have the app.
Yeah, you might have to have the app to play around. But it's not a big deal. I mean, it's not.
Doesn't give you your.
Oh, but it's so cute.
I know. Well, some people are.
Yeah, yep.
Kelly is here twice, by the way. I want to point out that Kelly is here. She's here, and then she's stationary in one look, and then she's in San Francisco in another. We should give a prize to the person who has the best background. You got to come up with something really creative.
I did.
That's all.
Did you?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
I like the
Dodger
baseball.
Stadium.
That's
Nice.
good.
We all like that one. All right, everybody,
Let's see.
stay healthy and gosh, who knows? Let's hope that we're join us for Shabbat in a couple of days. We're going to hear some of our friends. So I promise you, will be some new music on Shabbat. All right, everybody, take care.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good night.
Night.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye. Bye.